All right, everyone, welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka, and I am so happy today because I am terribly excited about our guests. We have Doug Manuel from Doug Manuel International. And do you speak djembe and how to media? Doug, awesome having you here today.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this, Damon. It's really exciting to be here with you.
I am excited. I am just really jumping up and down here because we're going to talk about purpose driven engagement. We're going to go back through some of your history. We're going to talk about how, as a producer for the BBC, you got introduced to drumming and how that's really affected your life from there on. So, as we always like to start out, let's start back there. You were a producer for the BBC. You did work in Africa and some other things. So let's talk about that a little bit and how you really discovered djembe and drumming.
So I was I left. We can go back even further. Actually, I
Very good.
failed everything at school. Went and washed
Nice.
dishes in ski resort in Switzerland in the winter, and then in the summer ended up in Cannes, where the famous film festival is, working on a beach down there. That led me to someone actually who needed a runner during the Cannes Film Festival, and
Okay.
that led me to going into film and TV. So I took this job as a runner during the Cannes Film Festival. That led me into starting working in film and television. And I kind of climbed my way up the ladder, and by the end, I was producing documentaries for the BBC. The last 2 years I worked in the BBC or for the BBC, I was working on a documentary about African elephants. So I got to travel all over Africa to film these amazing animals. And the film was they changed according to their habitat. So it was just an extraordinary experience.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah, that was really amazing. So in kind of Kenya, where they're in theory protected, they're these model elephants with these huge tusks. If you go to Namibia in the desert, their life is one constant trek between food and water. So they have massive long legs and huge splayed feet so they can cope walking in sand dunes. And then if you go into the forests in Central Africa, they're much smaller to be able to navigate through the forest. So it's like pygmies.
Wow.
And then if you go to Uganda, where the ivory trade was with Idi Amin in kind of late 70s, the elephants there today either have very small tusks or no tusks at all. So they found their way to evolve and survive in a relatively short period of time, in fact.
Wow.
So, yeah, these animals can adapt. It's really extraordinary, really extraordinary.
It is amazing. It is amazing.
It
I bet the cultures and because the diverse places you were at, the cultures, the animals, yes, that fantastic to be able to see how the animals develop differently based on their environment.
Absolutely.
That alone, just to think, because that didn't happen over hundreds of thousands of years, did it? Or was it shorter than that?
Probably in the rainforests and in the savannah, that was hundreds of years. But certainly in Uganda, that was a matter of
quick.
Yeah, I mean, a few decades. Really extraordinary. So
that's
and so when I was working at the BBC, I kind of had this double whammy introduction to Africa. A friend of mine, when I was working there, said to me, "Come on a djembe workshop." The djembe, I'll show you, is one of these drums. And I had an amazing day, and I said to myself at the end of that day, one day I'm going to go to Africa and I'm going to study the music. So at the end of making this film about elephants, my boss turned around and said, "Well, I'd like you to work on a film about gorillas." And when I put the budget and the schedule together, I realized I was only going to get between 7 and 12 weeks travel over 3 years. So it was essentially going to be an office-based job. And so I said, I have to go now. I'm sorry, I'm going to leave. And I said, I'll train up anyone you want me to train up. I'll give you all the contacts I made in Central Africa. But I have to go and find my part. So I packed in my job, took myself off to West Africa, found a djembe teacher initially in Gambia, and basically spent 6 months traveling around Gambia, Guinea, and Senegal, learning how to play djembe. And I was playing 5-6 hours every day with the African masters till I couldn't move my fingers. So yeah, and then I went back to England, where I was living in London, and I took 15 drums back with me. Did one more job in TV, making a documentary for Channel 4, it was, and realized I just couldn't do that anymore. So started running workshops, djembe workshops in schools and prisons and refugee centers, and struggled to make any money, and thought, well, the only way I'm going to make this work is if I take this into the private sector, which I did. That was back in, was it 2000? And never looked back. What can I say? That's basically been my life. So.
That's awesome. So let's just back up a little bit, because you gloss over the fact that you learned how to play djembe for 6 months traveling around Africa. I mean, what were some of the things, the lasting memories of that? Because that's an incredible, life-changing trip, I've got to believe.
It really was. I think, I mean, apart from the fact that, you know, it's an entirely different culture, and we can talk about it a little bit later, but I take my corporate clients now to West Africa on leadership retreats. And often they're saying, okay, well, what time are we doing this? What time are we doing this? What time are we doing this? It's like, you have to really think that here in the West, we have watches, and there they have time. And so it's a completely different approach to life. Magic happens in the moment. I think one of the biggest things that's really stayed with me is how I observe my own learning process. Because they don't necessarily break down rhythms in the way that the Western mind would want to understand them. And actually, my first teacher, he was left-handed, and I didn't get it for a few weeks. And I was sitting next to him, and I was trying to copy what his hands were doing. And then when I realized he was left-handed, rather than sitting next to him when I was taking my classes, I sat opposite him, and I could be his mirror. And all of a sudden, that was like a breakthrough moment where it was like, okay, I get this. I can follow his hands now. And so I think it's just interesting to always observe our own learning process and how we get from A to B, or and eventually to Z when we're learning something new. And just to persist and to find solutions to different ways of learning. And we all learn differently, right? So that was kind of a breakthrough moment for me. But then just the different way of life. I mean, a lot of the times in West Africa, people don't know what they're going to eat tomorrow, and they're smiling all the time. The sense of inherent community, the sense of inherent collaboration. I mean, if you sit there and you watch the fishermen on the beach going fishing, and then how they bring their massive boats back onto the beach, they're all working together. Everyone has their role, and none of them have been to a 5-star hotel on a team building program. So they just fit in, and they know how to do it because they have to. But it's also very intuitive, and it's much more a culture where it's around feeling as opposed to thinking. And of course, we need our brilliant thinking minds in business today, because we have to put our strategies together, and we have to learn, and we have to, we have to think about data and all of those things. I get all of that. But the wisdom of indigenous culture, we really need to bring that back into our organizations, just in terms of feeling. You can link that to emotional intelligence. How do we connect to each other? How can I enhance your experience, and how can you enhance my experience and make each other's lives better? I mean, that whole thing, the amount of times that companies say to me, oh, we're working in silos. I mean, that's just a mindset thing. That how can I make your life more interesting and better by, sharing and finding ways that we really come together, So there are all sorts of lessons that I learned during my time there that are really valuable to what I do today. Definitely.
One of the things that you said that just really impacts me, and in the triviality of a lot of things that I personally worry about, is you said that people don't know what to eat, but they're smiling. What they're going to eat tomorrow, but they're still smiling. And I think we get so caught up in the US, that's my frame of reference, on things that have very little to do with what we I mean, it just really doesn't, it shouldn't impact our happiness.
No,
It shouldn't
absolutely.
impact our happiness nearly as much as we allow it to.
Yeah. There's I actually have a house in Senegal in West Africa, and I do quite a lot of humanitarian work there. And one of the more recent trips, I went to the health center, and it was at night, and the medical center, and the midwife was there giving birth. Oh, there was a woman giving birth, and there was a power cut. And actually, the midwife then took a pocket torch and she stuck it between her shoulder and her ear, and that's how she delivered the baby. And I was witness to that. And it was like, oh, we'll just find a way to do it, you know. And here we've got so much. And of course, there's complications, and you know, from time to time, there's deaths, but they just find ways through, and in such a resourceful way. And I think that we've just lost a sense of that here in the West today, really.
Just different. But that's just, I love that. I love that line, what you said, because it really does the perseverance and the approach to life is just get it done, do what we need to do, and move on. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
So get off that, because that's a huge topic for me personally, and thanks so much for sharing that. It is, because I think that I just know, I know we get too wrapped up in things that are just like, why are we even, you know? And exactly. In the US, we spend trillions of dollars on stupid, shouldn't say trivial stuff that really doesn't make a difference, and time and effort. But it's great that you said that. So moving on, you're helping people now, and we're going to talk about your documentary a little bit, but how did you decided that you were trying to teach djembe in the schools and other things like that, and then you decided to go into the commercial sector with it. What really was the impetus for you not the impetus, but what was really your thought process, and what am I going to help them with in the commercial sector with djembe?
So there was an organization in the UK, in London, that's called Arts and Business. And what they did, I'm not sure whether they still do it, but what they did at the time was they gave classes to artists to show artists how their art form could be useful for organizations. So what they did was, it was an amazing exercise, actually. They said, when you're drumming, I mean, for me it was drumming, but there were artists there, and there were singers. You know, there was a whole array of different mediums and artists that were there that day. But from a drumming perspective, it's like, what are you doing when you're drumming? So you're feeling as opposed to thinking. So active listening. You have to be agile and listen to what other musicians are doing. So even there, you know, you've got, if you're feeling, then there's a whole piece there around emotional intelligence. It's like, how do you know if you trust somebody? It's because you feel it. You don't think trust. Active listening. It's like, are we listening to respond, or are we listening to react? You know, when we're listening, do we respond or do we react? And again, if you take that back into the musical context, we have to respond to each other. It's not about reaction. Okay.
Yes.
If you think about, collaboration, you have to be collaborating. You can't have 5 people playing a solo at the same time. Someone has to hold down the foundation so that somebody else can fly. There's innovation, there's creativity. It's just, it goes on and on and on. And then, you know, from my perspective as well today, is whenever I run a program, I'm, you know, really conscious as well. I'm a white guy who's been to Africa. And so I always bring in these amazing African musicians that, even though I've been playing for 20 years, make me look like a complete beginner. And then there's a piece around, you know, diversity and inclusion and equity, and these are all things that really matter today. This is what companies are looking for. That really matter. I mean, I think today we're in a situation today where staff retention is pretty much at an all-time low. Employee engagement is at an all-time low, and we have to find ways to tell a different story to the employees in an organization, so that we go back to origin stories of things, and appreciate skill sets, because that's what makes a difference today. So
I was just a part of a leadership retreat last week where they went through the origin story and shared the vision of the owner in the place, and it was a very powerful experience. And I don't think a lot of the people there, I didn't know the entire story either, and it was really something to hear the founder of the company give the origin story of his background, how the business has affected him and others in his life, and how he's affected other people. And it was a healthcare business. So, that origin story, you could feel it pulling the team together.
Absolutely. Beautiful. I mean, it's all about what value an organization creates, rather than, let's knock our competitor off the number one spot. I mean, I don't think that really motivates anybody.
Yeah.
We need to be looking much more at it's purpose driven, right? It's the value that we're creating, and how we're making a difference in the world.
Yeah. I can see now how the purpose driven engagement. So explain how you started to tie the purpose driven engagement into what you're doing.
I was always doing that to a certain degree, but I think the turning point of that was COVID.
Okay.
So my entire business was based on in-person events, and you'll probably want to ask me about the concert, the stage show that I created. And all of a sudden COVID came along and everything was shut down, and life changed for so many of us in so many different ways. But my business, just went completely south. I mean, like everything was in-person live events. And, when I started really thinking about it, I thought to myself, if you ask any of the djembe masters, the West African master drummers, they call them djembe folers, why does the djembe exist? And they would turn around to you and they would say, well, in the Malinke and Bambara tribes of West Africa, they used to say Anchor J, Anchor Bay, Anchor J, Anchor Bay, which the literal translation means everyone gather together. So Anchor J, Anchor Bay, djembe. That's how the word djembe originated. So I thought to myself, hang on a sec, the djembe is just technology, actually. It's just the most primal form of technology that exists. And if my purpose is to bring people together with some kind of engagement and purpose, and I do that with technology, then I can do it with a different type of technology. And so that whole notion of just being much more reflective and coming back to, why am I doing what I'm doing? What's my purpose? And I think, as any consultant or speaker, we can only take our audiences where we've been ourselves, because otherwise it's just and so the whole piece around purpose driven, let's get back to purpose driven, why are we doing what we're doing, that really became much more enhanced during and after COVID.
So let's talk about your stage show a little bit, and then we'll talk about how you adjusted during COVID, because I think you did a not so minor pivot as people used to talk about COVID. But talk about the stage show, because your stage show, I mean, you did a TEDx talk. We could talk about that. We could talk about the stage show. So let's start with the stage show, because I think, you've done, I don't even know where to start. You've done so many things in your stage show, but tell me about it. Tell me about why you put together, what was fun for you. What were some of the challenges? Who were some of the people you got? I thought, oh my goodness, I would never thought I would have been able to perform for them.
So when I was in Africa, the first time on the first study trip, something woke up inside me. And when I came back, the first thing I said was, everybody has to play djembe. The whole world has to play djembe. I need to get as many people playing djembe as possible. That was kind of my trip.
Nice.
And so anyway, so running these programs in the corporate world, and I guess it must have been like 2006, 2007. It was around then. I was living in Europe. I was living in Switzerland, and there was this conference speaker who was an orchestral conductor, and he was getting called into these big company events with the orchestra in the morning, and he was talking about how the orchestra is like a company, and everyone has their own role, and we have to listen to each other, and tons of messages. And then what was happening was I got brought in the afternoon with hundreds or thousands of djembes to turn everybody into the orchestra, to reinforce the metaphor. So that it wasn't just him giving theory. It was then, let's do it now. This is the practice.
Nice.
This is putting it into action. And we kept following each other around. And eventually I called him and I said, it must be that we need to do something together. We keep running into each other.
Yes.
So we ended up creating this stage show together. And we were 36 people on stage. It was a small African band, a whole symphony orchestra. Everyone in the audience got a drum. And we put this show together, and we had lots of fun. And then I produced the show myself in Geneva to raise money for UNICEF. And we did that under the high patronage of Sir Roger Moore, the best James Bond, in my view. But anyway.
Yeah.
And that night, unbeknownst to me, there was a producer in the audience who had a production company in Paris. And he said to me, this is an amazing concept, but you're 36 people on stage, you must be losing a fortune. And I said, yeah, we're losing a fortune, but we're having a great time.
Yeah.
If you can negotiate your way out of this with the orchestra, I have a production company in Paris, and I'll give you a 1-month run in Paris. So I did just that, and we did this month run in Paris. At 3.5 weeks, TF1, which is the French national TV station, we were on their news, the main news. And the phone was just ringing off the hook, and we had to then extend the production by another 6 weeks. So we ended up doing 3 months basically. We were on stage virtually every night, doing the stage show, and we created a story with it. The story was basically that ancestrally, and this is science. Ancestrally, if you trace us all far enough back, we all come from Africa. Africa being the cradle of humanity. I mean, there's that book *Sapiens*. I mean, that's Homo sapiens will come from Africa. And then the fun part of it was we explored the influence of the rhythms of the djembe on all the pop music we listen to today. So we had this whole audience playing with Michael Jackson and with a whole band on stage. And anyway, so we did that show. Then we went on tour around France and French-speaking Switzerland. We went back to Paris. That was 2015, and there was the terrorist attack at the Bataclan in Paris. I didn't sell any tickets, so I had to close the production down in France. I took the production to a bunch of producers that I'd met along the way in Europe, and they all said, if you want to make it big in Europe, you have to make it big in the States. I'm like, oh God, do we? So networked like crazy, and this amazing woman who I'd met had an amazing network in LA, and she found a way of doing a part of the show at TEDx Hollywood. So we did like a 15-16 minute slot at TEDx Hollywood, which was all about how technology enhances humanity, or should do anyway. And I think it was through this woman, but kind of unbeknownst to me, Oprah heard about it. She'd sent a team, and we ended up opening Oprah's third SuperSoul sessions at UCLA with 1,750 drums in the audience, with Oprah drumming. And then off the back of that, I found some investors. And we did a 4-month run in Chicago in 2019, and we were nominated for the Jeff Awards, the Chicago Theatre Awards. And then, well, COVID.
Yeah.
So kind of closed down lots
Yeah.
of things in its way,
Yeah.
you know.
But during COVID, you changed what you were doing a little bit, and now, I mean, it really looks like, yes, that was a hard end to probably a pretty productive part. But do you explain how you've changed and how you really feel about what you're doing now?
So, I mean, during COVID, I you know, when it started, like anyone else, I spent 2 weeks on the sofa, bawling my eyes out, thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? How am I
Yeah.
going to work? How am I going to feed myself? How, all these questions.
Yeah.
And then there was that technology piece that I spoke of earlier, that that I could still bring people together in a different way. You can't do anything with collective music making online because there's like this inherent sound delay. So but then having been on stage so much at so many events, it was like there's a whole thing around performance. And I've thought to myself, well, why have I never left the stage tired? Give all this energy playing and playing and playing and playing djembe is physical. And I was never tired when I came off stage. And I had the same script every night. And I realized that actually what I was doing was I was putting a different energy out every evening to bring the audience with me, because I was like the MC. And it made me realize that actually, if we can circulate energy between us, between people, then we don't need to go into burnout, and we don't need to get tired. And so anyway, I created this whole course, which I called the Energy Circle, which was, how to do virtual properly, based on the foundation that business became very transactional, and the intrapersonal went missing. And it was like, how could we bring that back in the virtual space? I believe we can, actually.
Yes.
I believe we can. And I still think that we haven't, a lot of organizations haven't figured out how to run breakouts properly. There's all sorts of icebreakers that we can do at the beginning of a meeting, or when people get stuck in a meeting, or when energy kind of gets low. There's all sorts of things we can do. And all of a sudden we're in this situation where, if I think about Africa and any indigenous culture, actually, there's no separation between work and life. So this whole notion of work-life balance is really nonsense. If you go to Africa, it's work-life integration. The kids are running around. There's music, the food's cooking, there's people coming past, and all of a sudden, in the COVID space, there were kids coming in. I remember a meeting I had with an HR director of a huge company, a Swiss company, and I heard birds singing, and I thought, oh, he's probably got his window open, and it was a warm summer day. And the next thing I knew, there was a budgie that landed on his shoulder, and he spent the rest of the call tickling this bird under its chin. And I mean, every time I'd seen him, this guy, he was in a suit in his office.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he became human, and so who makes the rules? Do we have to sit down all day long? What's wrong with just standing up and putting some music on, which we can do in the virtual space, and dancing around for 30 seconds, 1 minute, if it makes us more productive, it brings us together? And how can we create those shared experiences in a different way, so that we're just, at the end of the day, closer as people, more connected and more productive? And we can make our own rules, but we go into this kind of work owner that kills everything. And that's what happens when we separate work and life, and we have to integrate. That's the point. That's the point.
I laugh because, and I'm just flabbergasted here, because I never realized what my heritage. I grew up on a family farm in the Dakotas, a working family farm. There was no work-life balance. It was like you said. I remember walking out. My my father's working on a piece of equipment or driving, you know, or working with animals or doing all this kind of stuff. It wasn't day, night. It was, we're living and it's all together. And I never really have seen work-life balance. And I even call my life is just work is integrated into my life. And when you said that, how there's no real separation between work and life, that it always rings a strong chord with me, because we try to separate, and there's always competition when you separate. But when you integrate, you find that it is so much easier. And I hadn't heard anyone use COVID as and the working from home or virtual work and the other ways that we learn how to do that, because it is that if you can integrate, you don't have to go home tired at the end of the day or finish your day wherever you are. You don't have to finish it tired, because you are doing things throughout the day, including work, that really keeps you energized, keeps you better as a person and better as a professional. And yeah, that's awesome, man. So you started, so then did you start to teach people how to really understand the work-life integration part, or what were you doing then during COVID?
Yeah, so I have a kind of hour-long super interactive keynote that
Nice.
that takes people through the exercises and ask questions, and we go into breakouts, and we come back and it's ask another question, another energizer. And so it's partly to help organizations link the personal purpose of any given employee to the purpose of the organization through the organization's origin story, and mixed up with you can do this and you can do this and you can do this to make your virtual interactions, you know, more interesting. Wow. So yeah, that's one of the things that I do. So, and the other thing that kind of really touched me during COVID, I couldn't play djembe at home because living in Switzerland is an amazing country, but noise pollution is a big problem in some parts of the country. To the point where, and I kid you not, in some parts of the country, you can't even run a bath or flush your toilet after 10 o'clock at night in some parts of Switzerland. Honestly.
Wow.
Here's where you are, but in some parts. And so on one of the trips to West Africa, I brought back one of these instruments, which is it's a calabash, and it's basically a West African harp. And I wanted to make music at home. And you know, I could play that whenever I wanted in the middle of the night or whatever. And I found myself a teacher in Senegal, in West Africa, and he used to send me these little snippets, and I used to practice and practice and practice, and then film myself, and then I'd send them back to him, and then he gave me, you know, another thing to practice and play. And what's interesting about this instrument is in West Africa, the kora is known to play the music of the soul, and it made me think, you know, the without wanting to go esoteric and fluffy, but organizations are made up of people, and people have souls. And anyway, so a whole new keynote was born, called the Soul of Business, where we go back to personal purpose, link purpose to the personal purpose, the purpose of the organization, and then we live it through, you know, some interactive musical exercises. So all sorts of COVID was like amazing. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think if you used it like you did, yes. Yeah. I mean, to think and really contemplate and reinvent some of the things that you're doing, and the way that you're now helping people link their personal purpose to the organizational purpose. After you do that, that has to be dramatically different. The organizations have to feel dramatic and operate dramatically different when that happens.
I think that's where productivity really soars.
Yes.
I mean, that's what people need. I mean, and why are people disengaged? And it's because, you know, the senior leaders often are telling their people the wrong story. It's no one's interested about knocking a competitor off the number one spot. No one, I don't think anyone really cares about that today. Of course, the
Yes.
shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized that,
Yeah.
but the people and the souls in the organization, they want to go to work feeling like they've contributed to something.
Yes.
And they created value.
I'm thinking about what you just said about the leaders and how they sometimes do that. They talk about shareholder value and those kind of things. And I think everybody understands that's what you want to do in business by the end of the day. But if it's a focus or the focus and not the focus, like you're saying, how do we get personal purpose aligned with organizational purpose to drive something better than we ever envisioned? Because once you drive what's better than we ever envisioned, we will create shareholder value. We will be better than everybody else. That all happens, but it happens because we've aligned the people and their hearts, their minds, and their bodies together. And that alignment, you feel it in organizations when you do this. You feel it. You feel the passion. You feel the caring. You feel the people working together to do what they need to do. And honestly, you see the 1 + 1 = 3 in those businesses where they come up with ideas that you had no idea. The two people walk into a situation, neither one of them has the idea of the solution, but the solution they came up with was better than either one of theirs to start with. And that purpose, the alignment of purpose, is where you connect that together. So completely super cool, man. Super cool.
And I think
you had.
I was just going to say, it needs to be experience as opposed to theory. So people need to be taken through the process. That's not something that you would get from a book, even if it's something we all know. It's kind of
no. I've been fortunate enough for a couple companies where it's hit me like that, and when it does, it is one of those things you remember that I'm talking 20 years ago. I still remember that kind of thing. And so you're really helping people, find purpose, personal purpose in what they're doing. Yeah.
Because, the world we need companies. I mean, companies do create value in our life, so, but we just need to flick that switch, so.
Yes. You had to have seen some pretty powerful situations and experiences doing this, helping people. Just had to be some real powerful things that you were just like,
yeah, it's been amazing. It's been an amazing journey, and it's still at the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, that's why it's probably, I hope it's still very exciting for you, because we got a lot of people that need to know about it.
Yeah. No, it's definitely still at the beginning. I mean, when you say a lot of people, that's kind of the reason for the next project that I'm working on right now, which is a documentary. We're starting to film in West Africa in March.
Let's talk about that.
So it came about in an interesting way. I was talking to a client just before Christmas, and she said to me, I've never met anyone who has based their business on the wisdom of indigenous culture and has made a success of it. And I'm like, oh, is that what I do? Kind of when you're in something, you don't see what someone else's perspective might be. And she said, oh, someone should make a documentary about you. And I was like, oh, okay. So I follow this guy called Richard DePilla on LinkedIn. And I saw in his title that his role had changed, or his job description had changed, and all of a sudden he'd become the chief growth officer of a production company in West Palm Beach called How To Media. And I sent them an email and said, oh, someone should make a documentary about me. Anyway, we got talking, and indeed that's what's happening. So I went to my investors, who helped me in an incredibly generous way with a stage show. And when I take things to them and they like it, they say, okay, we'll put in some more. And so we're making this documentary. And it's all basically, I'm going to see a bunch of stuff in West Africa I've never seen before, despite the fact I've been traveling there for 25 odd years.
Yes.
The director is working with this master drummer, and they're going to take me on this journey, and we're going to basically explore all the values that I've talked about: purpose-driven, collaboration, respect, tolerance, listening. And we're going to tell that story through, I'm not sure quite what story it'll be because I don't know the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be due out in October time.
Okay.
How To Media are amazing partners. I mean, really amazing.
Awesome.
And there'll be snippets all over LinkedIn, and we'll bring all of this stuff to life and hopefully reach a much wider audience. I mean, it's what the world needs.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And it's amazing, like you said, 25 years of traveling into Africa, learning what you learned, you're going to get to travel in new places and learn more about this. I can only imagine what you're going to be doing with that knowledge after the documentary is done.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. Life is such a, it's when something happens, then it just enhances. I mean, with what I do as a speaker, it only enhances the value I can create for others. So
yes.
So
that's amazing, man. That's amazing. I am so happy for you because, I mean, listen to what you're doing. Listening to, back from when you were at the BBC, how you found your way to Africa, then how you took your time to learn about the djembe and drumming and taking that and then bringing that back with your stage show and doing that. And then, of course, COVID just slapped you. But what it was a time for you to reinvent into something that may actually prove to be more powerful or more life-changing for people in the long term.
For sure.
I mean, how cool is that?
And it wasn't easy. It's not
no,
easy.
No, not easy. I'm not saying none of it's easy.
It's never easy, right?
Yeah.
But it's that's what life is.
But it's incredible. It's just incredible.
Tony Robbins, he always said, life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us.
Yeah.
And I really believe that's true.
Yeah. Wow.
I really believe that's true.
Doug, this has been incredible. This is incredible talking to you, man. I get so excited. And how you're talking about purpose-driven engagement. You're helping people link their personal purpose in life with the organization, and the way you're tying that in with music and djembe and indigenous cultures, and how it's so appropriate for what we need in business today.
Back to the source, back to the roots.
Yeah. I don't even know what else to say. I just appreciate you so much for sharing this with us, because this is something that's going to continue to change people for decades, man.
I hope I hope it just brings us back to what we are already.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that whole notion of, we need to take things digital, but we need to keep things human.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Again, we need to take things digital, but keep them human.
That's it.
Awesome.
That's it.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for talking about Do You Speak Djembe, the How To Media documentary. And you said the working title before we got on, it's Beats as One.
Beats as One.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. And that's going to be coming out in October. If someone wants to get a hold of you, what's a good way to contact you?
Either through LinkedIn.
Okay.
Or my website, which is Manuel, MANUEL.com.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, Doug, thanks so much for being here today. I can't express my appreciation for you sharing this today and talking about purpose-driven engagement. Thank you.
Damon, it's been a huge pleasure. Thanks to you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Well, hang out just for a minute. I want to say thank you to everyone else that was listening today, making comments. Thanks for stopping by. You can always check the replay out of my profile on LinkedIn or on the Exit Your Way website. We will be back again with another amazing guest. Thank you, everyone.